She thought no one noticed the bruises she hid every day, until one millionaire asked a question that changed her entire life. Bryson Hale was not the kind of millionaire who craved constant attention. He was young, calculated, and elegant in his silence. His power whispered rather than roared. Though he owned an entire chain of high-end restaurants across Texas, he had a peculiar fondness for just one: the Velvet Hearth, tucked into a quieter corner of Austin, where brick walls and golden chandeliers made it feel more like a dream than a business. He didn't visit for the food. It was exquisite, yes, but predictable. Bryson came for something he couldn't name. Perhaps it was the way the place slowed down time. Or perhaps it was her, Linnell Sloan. She wasn't the kind of woman who stood out. She never flirted, never spoke more than necessary, and always wore long sleeves, no matter the weather. She moved like someone trying not to be noticed. But Bryson noticed her anyway. There was something solemn in her eyes, something buried under layers of silence and perfect posture. She always called him Mr. Hale, never made eye contact for longer than a second, but she remembered every detail: his usual table, his preferred drink, the exact temperature of his coffee. That evening, Bryson sat alone near the back window, glancing over his phone but not really reading. He was watching her out of the corner of his eye. Something was off. Linnell placed the menu in front of him, her sleeve slipping slightly as she reached across the table. That's when he saw it. A dark smudge just above her wrist. A bruise, not one of those accidental ones people get from bumping into furniture. No, this was older, deeper, and surrounded by newer ones, barely fading beneath her skin. He frowned slightly, but said nothing at first. As she turned to leave, he leaned forward and said gently, "Linnell." She froze mid-step, turned halfway toward him. "Are you okay?" he asked, quiet, direct. She blinked, once, then again, like her body couldn't decide whether to stay still or run. "I'm fine, sir," she said without meeting his gaze. "Is there anything else I can get you?" Bryson didn't answer. He just watched her walk away slower than usual, her right leg favoring the left ever so slightly. Something twisted in his chest, something heavy. He didn't know what it was yet, but whatever it wasn't fine. After that night, Bryson couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't like him to get involved in other people's lives. He'd built his empire by staying focused, unemotional, objective. But something about Linnell's eyes when she said, "I'm fine," haunted him. They hadn't been afraid. They'd been resigned, like a flame that had given up trying to burn. The next evening, he returned to the Velvet Hearth earlier than usual, before the dinner rush. The place was nearly empty, dim sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. Linnell wasn't on the floor yet, so he sat in silence, his thoughts loud. He didn't have a plan, just questions, and a persistent ache in his chest that logic couldn't explain. When she finally appeared, dressed in her usual white blouse and black apron, he noticed something new. Her left wrist was wrapped in a beige compression bandage, covered as always, but not well enough. She avoided looking at him as if hoping he wouldn't recognize her. But, of course, he did. She brought his drink, dark roast coffee, no sugar, and turned to walk away. "Linnell," he said softly. She stopped. Didn't turn around this time. "I saw the bruises." Silence. Her back remained to him. "They're not from work," he continued. "I know what burnout looks like. This isn't that." Finally, she turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see her profile. You shouldn't ask," she whispered. "You don't want to be involved in this." "I wouldn't ask if I didn't want to." She turned fully now, her face pale, jaw tense. "With all due respect, Mr. Hale, people like you don't understand how this works." "Then explain it to me." Her eyes narrowed. "Why? So you can feel good about helping someone for one night before going back to your life?" He didn't flinch. "No, because I don't like watching people drown while everyone pretends not to see the water." A long silence stretched between them. Then she said quietly, but with a weight that cracked through her composure, "If you start asking questions, I might not be alive to answer them tomorrow." He stood up slowly, not to threaten, but to meet her at eye level. "Is someone hurting you?" Her lips parted as if to answer, but then she closed them again. Looked down at her shoes. She didn't nod. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. It was written all over her silence. Before she could walk away, Bryson took out his business card and placed it gently on the table. "If you ever need a way out," he said, "don't wait too long to take it." Linnell looked at the card for only a second before turning and walking briskly into the kitchen. But as the door swung behind her, Bryson caught something he hadn't seen before. Her hand was shaking. Bryson didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, calm on the outside but trembling beneath. He had witnessed countless business deals fall apart, seen desperation in boardrooms and fury in legal battles, but none of it had ever unsettled him the way Linnell's silence did. By morning, he had already made up his mind. He called Tobias Ridge, his personal assistant and longtime confidant, a man known for getting answers without leaving footprints. Tobias didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Give me a name." Linnell Sloan. "I want to know who she lives with, what her history is, and why she's terrified to leave." By noon, Tobias had a file in his hands. It wasn't thick, but it was dark. What it lacked in volume, it made up for in dread. Her stepfather, Tobias said, laying the manila folder down on Bryson's desk. Silas Brigham, convicted 3 times. Domestic violence, weapons charges, obstruction of justice. Charges dropped or pled down every time. Bryson picked up a grainy photo from inside the folder. A thick-necked man in his early 50s, with cold, vacant eyes and a jaw clenched like a trap. There was something feral in his stare, something that made Bryson's stomach twist. "What about her mother?" Bryson asked. "Died when Linnell was 17. Car accident, but there were inconsistencies in the report. No autopsy. Silas claimed she lost control during an argument and drove into a tree. Police didn't push further. And no other family?" Tobias shook his head. "None listed. No siblings. No living grandparents. Looks like she's been on her own ever since." Bryson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "She's trapped," he said softly. "Yes, and likely being abused again." There was a long pause before Tobias added, "Silas is smart. Never leaves marks on the face. Keeps her isolated. Tracks her phone. Likely reads her messages. She's been programmed not to run." Bryson stared out the window. The city moved beneath him, oblivious and glittering, but all he could see was the bruised wrist beneath her sleeve. The way her voice trembled when she warned him not to get involved. He'd seen women like her before, on paper, in statistics, in shelter funding proposals. But this wasn't a case study. This was Linnell. He closed the folder and said, "We need a plan. One that doesn't get her hurt, or worse." Tobias nodded, already reaching for his phone. Bryson didn't know what kind of man he was becoming. He only knew this. He couldn't walk away. Not from her. Not now. 3 days passed before Bryson returned to the velvet hearth. This time he didn't sit at his usual table. Instead, he stood by the bar, arms crossed, waiting for her to notice him. The restaurant buzzed softly with the hum of conversation and silverware clinking against fine china. But for him, everything narrowed to the moment Linnell emerged from the back hallway carrying a tray of water glasses. She saw him immediately. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but she didn't falter. She approached, composed as ever, though her eyes flicked around nervously, scanning the room like someone always checking for exits. "Mr. Hale," she said politely, setting down a glass in front of him, even though he hadn't ordered one. "You're not at your table today." "I didn't come to eat," he replied evenly. "I came to offer you something." She stiffened. "You shouldn't be here." "Then let's not talk here. Come outside for 5 minutes. That's all I ask." She didn't respond right away, but after a moment, she gave a nearly imperceptible nod. 5 minutes. They stepped out the back exit into a quiet alleyway, far from the buzz of the dining room. The sun had already dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the brick. Bryson turned to face her fully. "I'm not going to ask you for details. I already know more than I should." Linnell crossed her arms, defensive. "Then you know that involving yourself is dangerous. I also know you've been living in fear for years, and I'm offering you a way out." She flinched. "There is no out. That's the part people don't understand. You can't just run from a man like Silas." "I'm not asking you to run. I'm offering you an opportunity." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside were travel documents, a job contract, and keys. "I bought a small guest house in Oregon. Quiet town, new phone number, new life. You'd have a full-time position in my company, remote work, admin-based, no pressure and no contact unless you choose it. The place is secured, monitored, protected. You'd be safe." Her lips parted slightly, caught between breath and disbelief. "Now you're trying to rescue me like I'm some project," she whispered bitterly. "No," he said, his voice calm and steady. I'm giving you back your choice, something he took from you a long time ago. She looked down at the envelope, then shook her head slowly. He'll find me. He always does. He watches everything. He'll come after anyone who helps me. I'm not scared of him, Bryson said. Well, I am, she snapped suddenly, and her voice cracked. I live every day with a target on my back, Mr. Hale. Not because I'm weak, but because he made sure I believed I was nothing without his permission. That's not something you fix with a plane ticket. There was a long silence between them. Then she added, almost in a whisper, I appreciate what you're offering, but I can't accept it. He didn't try to persuade her. He only handed her the envelope and said, I'll keep this offer open, but one day you might not get another chance. Linnell stared at it, then back at him. What if I take it and he hurts someone else instead? Bryson stepped closer, not imposing, but sincere. That's not your responsibility. It never was. What happens to him is on him. What happens to you, though, that's still within your power? She said nothing, but for the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest crack in the wall she had built. He left the envelope in her hands and walked away without another word. That night, she didn't sleep either. But unlike all the nights before, she found herself staring not at the bruises, but at the key. The following morning, Bryson received a single text. I'm ready. It was from an unknown number, but he didn't need to guess who sent it. Without hesitation, he activated the security plan he and Tobias had spent nights preparing. Within the hour, a black SUV with tinted windows and a veteran protection agent named Marla pulled up outside the velvet hearth. Linnell was already standing by the rear door, her apron folded neatly in her arms, her face pale but resolved. She didn't bring a suitcase, just a backpack. Marla opened the door without a word, and Linnell slid inside. By the time Silas realized she wasn't coming home, they were already crossing the Texas state line. What Linnell didn't know, what Bryson didn't tell her, was that the moment she said yes, he had activated a private surveillance team to monitor Silas's every move. Not to provoke him, but to protect her from a distance. Silas was dangerous, unpredictable, and sharp. They had to assume he'd come looking, and he did. 2 nights later, at 2:11 a.m., a camera in a parking lot near the Velvet Hearth captured a blurry image of Silas Brigham. He was circling the alley behind the restaurant, looking into windows, trying doors. Then he disappeared into the shadows. The footage was delivered to Bryson an hour later. He's fishing, Tobias said grimly. He thinks someone here helped her. He won't stop until he finds out who. Bryson stared at the image on the screen. Silas's face looked like it had aged 10 years. Angrier, darker, more desperate. There was something primal in his movements. I want round-the-clock surveillance on him, Bryson said. I don't care what it costs. Tobias nodded. Already done. Meanwhile, Linnell had arrived in the small Oregon town of Elmsfield. It was foggy when she stepped out of the SUV, the air sharp with pine and salt. The guest house was modest but beautiful. Wooden beams, a porch swing, a small garden in the back. Inside, it smelled like cedar and cinnamon. Marla handed her the keys. There's food stocked, emergency numbers on the fridge. No one knows you're here. Linnell stood in the center of the living room for a long time, her bag still on her back, staring at the fireplace like she didn't know how to exist in a room that didn't feel dangerous. You don't owe anyone anything anymore, Marla said gently. This is your space now. After Marla left, Linnell locked the door behind her and stood with her back pressed to it, breath shallow, hands trembling. She waited for the pounding on the door, waited for the sound of a key turning that wasn't hers, waited for Silas's voice on the other side. But none of it came. For the first time in years, the only sound she heard was wind in the trees and the tick of a clock. That night she made herself tea, just because she could. She sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her and watched the fog roll over the hills. No screams, no threats, just space. Across the country, Bryson sat alone in his high-rise office, watching the alert system on his tablet. Motion sensors, check-ins, a list of Silas's known contacts being monitored. He told himself he wasn't obsessed, but the truth was, he had never felt so responsible for another human life. He just hoped it wasn't too late to make her believe she had one of her own. The quiet in Elmsfield didn't last long. A week into her new life, Linnell was beginning to breathe normally again. She had started each morning with a walk through the pine trails behind the guest house. The kind of walks she'd only dreamed about before. No one behind her, no text messages demanding her return, no threats if she didn't answer in time. She bought groceries in a local market where the cashier smiled at her for no reason. She even started keeping a journal. 3 sentences a day, nothing more. But it was the first time she had ever written without fear of someone reading over her shoulder. Then, on the 8th night, she received a package. It had no return address. The handwriting was familiar. Inside was a photograph, an old one. She was 17, standing with her mother, and in the background, barely visible through the kitchen window, was Silas, his face half hidden, but unmistakable. Also in the box was a phone, burner model, cheap plastic. It buzzed the moment she touched it. She didn't answer. Instead, she wrapped it in foil, just as Bryson had taught her during a quick call days earlier, and buried it in the freezer. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she called him. "I think he found me," she said, her voice low and calm, but her hand was shaking. "Or he's trying to make me think he has." Bryson didn't waste a second. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'm sending someone now." He dispatched Marla again, this time with 2 additional security personnel. In less than 2 hours, they reached Elmsfield and began sweeping the property. No cameras were tampered with, no footprints near the windows. But the package had been left in the mailbox by hand. Someone had been close. Meanwhile, Tobias was working overtime. He tracked the burner phone signal and triangulated the nearest pings to a gas station 15 miles outside town. A man matching Silas's description had been seen filling a red truck with out-of-state plates. Cash only, hoodie pulled low. The problem was, by the time police were informed, he was gone. Bryson paced his office, fury boiling just beneath his carefully maintained exterior. "He's circling," Tobias said, running another search. "He knows she's alive. He just doesn't know exactly where. Yet." "He's not just playing with her," Bryson murmured. "He's reminding her he still has power." They needed leverage. That night, Tobias pulled something that changed everything. Years ago, Silas had used a now-deactivated social media account to share encrypted photos in a private chat group. With the help of a forensic cybersecurity expert, they retrieved fragments of video clips, raw footage of Silas intimidating, threatening, and in at least one recording, physically assaulting a woman who looked terrified. It wasn't Linnell. It was someone else. Another victim. Bryson stared at the screen, jaw tight. "Who is she?" "Name's Cassidy Vaughn," Tobias said. "Worked with him on a construction crew years ago. Went missing for 2 months. No charges filed. But she's alive?" Tobias nodded slowly. "Living in New Mexico. She changed her name, but the face recognition confirmed the match. Want me to reach out?" "Only if she's willing," Bryson said. "Tell her we can protect her." 3 days later, Cassidy Vaughn walked into a courthouse in Dallas and swore under oath that she had been held against her will by Silas Brigham for 6 weeks. She showed scars, physical and emotional. She had a story that mirrored Linnell's almost word for word. The DA took the case seriously. With the new testimony, a warrant was issued. Now, Silas wasn't just a shadow. He was a fugitive. Bryson called Linnell that night. She picked up after one ring. "They're coming for him," he said quietly. "And this time, he won't walk away." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "I don't want revenge. I just want him gone." Bryson nodded slowly, though she couldn't see him. "That's exactly what we're doing." The arrest came quietly, but its impact thundered through every corner of Linnell's soul. It was just after 4 a.m. when Tobias called Bryson with the news. Silas Brigham had been located in a rundown motel on the outskirts of Shreveport, Louisiana. He had been using fake credentials under the name James Belton, but the forensic team had been watching his movements for days. The moment Cassidy Vaughn's testimony went public, they knew he'd try to flee across state lines. He didn't get far. Marshals found him asleep with a loaded weapon on the nightstand. He didn't resist. Not because he surrendered, but because he was too confident they had nothing solid. Again, he was wrong. Bryson didn't call Linnell immediately. He waited until the sun had risen over Elmsfield, until he knew she had likely taken her morning walk, fed the cat that had started visiting her porch, and sat down with her usual cup of chamomile tea. When he finally dialed her number, she answered with a cautious voice. "Is it over?" she asked. "They have him," Bryson said. "He's in custody. No bail. He's facing charges across 3 states, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana. The evidence is strong. The witness list is longer than anyone expected. There was a long pause. He heard her exhale, a deep, almost trembling breath, like someone who had been underwater for too long. I thought I'd feel something, she whispered. You don't? I don't feel triumph. I don't even feel safe. I just feel empty. Bryson didn't try to correct her. He understood. Sometimes safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was learning to live in the absence of fear. And that took time. Empty is a beginning, he said quietly. It means you finally have space to fill. That evening, Linnell sat alone on the porch, staring at the sky. The stars above Elmsfield were clearer than she'd ever seen. There were no sirens, no footsteps outside her window, no coded threats, just wind and pine, and a silence that no longer felt like suffocation, but like possibility. The next day, a representative from the district attorney's office called to ask if she would testify. Her voice trembled when she said yes. I want my voice on the record, she told them. Not because I need him punished, but because I need someone else to hear what he did and know they're not alone. Court was scheduled 3 months later. When the day arrived, Linnell wore a simple navy blue dress. Her posture was still humble, still gentle, but her eyes were stronger. She walked into that courtroom with her chin high, not to destroy Silas, but to reclaim her place in the world as someone who mattered. Bryson was there, not in the spotlight, not next to her, but seated quietly in the back row, watching as she spoke each word with measured clarity. Silas sat handcuffed, his face unreadable. But it didn't matter anymore. He couldn't reach her, not with chains on his wrists, not with a courtroom full of people finally listening. When she finished testifying, she stepped down from the stand and didn't look back. That night, Bryson met her outside the courthouse. You didn't have to come, she said softly. I know, he replied, but I wanted to. They didn't talk about the trial, or about Silas, or about what came next. They just walked side by side through the quiet streets of Dallas, and for the first time since she was 17, Linnell didn't glance over her shoulder. 6 months had passed since the courtroom doors closed behind Silas Brigham for the final time. He was sentenced to 32 years without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell, and with it, a chapter of Linnell Sloan's life was sealed shut, not erased, but no longer in control of her. But healing, Linnell discovered, wasn't an event. It was a slow, uneven unfolding. Some mornings she woke up feeling weightless. Other days, she still startled at the sound of a knock or flinched at sudden movement. The scars weren't gone, they had just stopped bleeding. In Elmsfield, she began planting again. Her backyard, once an empty stretch of grass, was slowly becoming a blooming refuge. Lavender, rosemary, sunflowers. Each seed was a decision to stay. Each sprout a reminder that she could grow roots in soil not soaked in fear. She started painting again, too. Something she hadn't done since childhood. Abstract shapes at first, then color, then outlines, until one day she painted a portrait of herself, not as she had been, but as she was becoming, stronger, unfolding, alive. Bryson kept his distance at first, careful not to impose on the fragile quiet she was building. But he never disappeared. He sent her books, letters, a small wind chime for the porch, nothing romantic, not yet, just presence. Just kindness that didn't ask for anything in return. One chilly morning in December, she called him. I think I'm ready, she said softly. For what? He asked. For a visit. He arrived 2 days later, driving himself. No security detail, no assistance, just him. He brought a thermos of coffee from her favorite Austin cafe and a scarf she once mentioned she liked in passing. When he stepped onto her porch, he paused, taking in the sight of her standing in the doorway, arms folded, but no longer closed. I like the wind chime, he said. I hung it where it catches the morning sun, she replied. They sat together on the porch swing, sipping coffee in silence for a while. It wasn't awkward. It was honest, real, like two people who didn't need to fill the air with explanations. Do you ever regret getting involved? She asked eventually. Bryson turned to her. No, I only regret not doing it sooner. She looked down at her hands, now calloused from gardening. I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again. You don't have to trust the whole world, he said. Just one person at a time. She looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and gently rested her hand over his. It was small, quiet. But to both of them, it felt like the loudest thing in the world. In the weeks that followed, Bryson began visiting more often. Sometimes they spoke for hours, Sometimes they painted side by side in silence. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just a growing comfort, a gentle unfolding. Two people learning how to be seen without fear. One evening, as the sky turned gold and purple over the hills, he asked, "Do you think you'll ever leave this place?" She smiled softly. "I used to think I was trapped in Elmsfield. Now I realize it's where I was finally set free." And then, without hesitation, she added, "But I wouldn't mind sharing it with someone who never looked away." He nodded, smiling. Not a fairy tale. Not a rescue story, but a real one. And for both of them, it was more than enough. As the author, I believe the ending of this story reflects the quiet power of resilience and the kind of love that isn't built on grand gestures, but on consistency, patience, and presence. Linnell's journey was never about being saved. It was about being given the space and safety to rediscover her own voice, her own strength, and her right to choose. Bryson, despite his wealth and resources, did something far more meaningful than writing a check. He listened. He didn't force healing. He simply stood beside her without demanding anything in return. That, to me, is the truest form of love. The story doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with something braver: quiet trust, mutual respect, and the beginning of a life that finally belongs to her. And I think that's what makes it beautiful. Not that it's perfect, but that it's honest. In a world obsessed with dramatic transformations, this was a story about slow, real healing and the courage it takes to believe in yourself again after being broken. And sometimes that's the miracle.